Hey everybody, welcome back to Catholic Saints Daily. Today's saint, quote unquote, we're going to be looking at is actually a blessed. He's becoming one of my favorite um, saints, blesseds, holy persons in heaven. His name is Pier Giorgio of Frassati. And so I kind of just want to break down his life, obviously from the early life, his charity, his death, the importance, and then a significant miracle that I believe is going to hopefully get him canonized as a saint. So I want to begin first with his early life. So he was born in 1901. He was born into a wealthy family. They owned a newspaper, and I would say they were elitists. They were very rich, wealthy, a lot of power, a lot of connections. So he was born to them in Turin, Italy. The newspaper was called La Stampa. Um, Basically, essentially, nothing was extraordinary about Pierre. He was an average student, but he was also known, as in his youth for his great devotion and his piety. Um, so right now, I want to focus on his charity. So even though they were a wealthy family, his dad was very, I wouldn't say cheap, but frugal with their money. And so his father barely gave him any spending money, for like many of us who don't have jobs yet, or they're, kids, they get money from their parents to go movie theaters and eat and go out with friends. And so his dad rarely gave them money. Um, but the money that Pierre did receive, he immediately gave it to the poor or someone who's in more need than him for the money. So very often he would give his dad's money to homeless people or poor people, and he would often find himself having to run home or ride in the third class section, I guess, in a train just to get home. So that was a common practice for him to do. He would always give whatever he had to the poor. So that was a pretty cool event in his life that I kind of related to, because how many times do we, drive by homeless people or never really think to give them anything? And so Pierre was doing this at a very young age. And so now I want to transition into his death. So he died when he was 24 years old. So a lot of the time, what I just mentioned about his charity came from his early youth, his teenage years, and then early 20s, which is pretty rare to see, especially in someone that young. So he died from polio at 24. And so because his family was so wealthy and they had connections and power, they were expecting at his funeral, they were expecting the guests to be very high class, rich people, political figures, leaders, other respectable first class citizens to attend. However, though, they did not show up. But the people who did show up were all those who he had helped. I mean, he probably helped hundreds, well, let's just say thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, I guess indirectly, of the poor people and homeless citizens in his country. And so all those people showed up. The family was shocked because Pierre never really advertised what he did. So it was very secretive about his whereabouts and what he did. And so his family was very shocked that at the funeral, all these people that they expected to show up, the rich and the famous, were not there. But the people that Pierre gave his life to and his money to and his time to and his prayer life to, honestly, showed up, which was very beautiful, in my opinion. And so his feast day is on July 24th. And so why, in my opinion, is Pier Giorgio Frassati important in today's world? My first point is the relatability. So he was born kind of recently in the context of modern times. 1901 is not that far long ago. But also he was an athlete. He loved to ski. He loved to climb mountains. He was just your everyday average person. He smoked cigars. And so he had like a very infectious personality. He loved to crack jokes. And so when I think of Pier Giorgio Frassati, I think of, some of my best friends that I'm close to who especially for me, because an athlete. I love to play sports and do stuff actively outside. He's a very, I would say, close friend and relatable person to me. And so, essentially, in my opinion, his normalcy is what is an attractive trait, and that people are drawn to, as you can see, especially from the poor people at his funeral. Um, and so, especially for me being an athlete, he's a witness to the fact that saints are not that much different from us. And that sainthood doesn't necessarily mean that there are supernatural powers that they were given from God. I mean, obviously, there are saints who have extraordinary gifts. You know, you think about Padre Pio and um, the stigmata and being able to read souls, but also people like Pier, Giorgio, and also, let's see, Therese of Lisieux. They're just saints because they were normal lives and they just ascended because of their love for God and their charity. And so that's what I think I'm really drawn, and I think other people are drawn to Pier Giorgio, is because of his normalcy and that um, anyone can do it. Not anyone, but it's possible. Okay, so now I want to transition into a miracle story that I read about, and this is public knowledge, so like I don't have a problem saying this guy's name. So the miracle begins in 2011. A man named Kevin Becker fell from a second floor of a house that he shared with college roommates. He fractured his skull in 5 different places and damaged his brain very severely. And so they obviously brought him to the hospital, and then after surgeries and operations, he was unresponsive for several days. And the doctors said he wouldn't live, and if he did live, he would suffer, and he would be essentially brain dead and suffering from very severe cognitive deficits. But a week after his injury, the doctors were they put him into a medically induced coma as like a Hail Mary attempt to keep him alive. And then days later, after this coma, he was fine, essentially. He was speaking, standing, and walking. And so afterwards, Kevin had a miraculous healing where when he was in physical therapy, the doctors found that he was several steps ahead of the other people there that were suffering from the same cognitive disabilities that he was or should have had. And those people were those who have been in recovery for 6 months to a year. So like he's day one way ahead of the people who have had severe brain injuries. And then all the cognitive tests that he took afterwards showed no indication of an injury, which shocked doctors. And so this is in 2011, so it's not that long ago. And so they had the medicine to definitely keep up with the injury, and so they were shocked. And so now I just phrase it as Inter Pier. And so afterwards, years after, Kevin did a talk, and he explained a supernatural event that occurred during his coma. And so in his coma, he said he remembers waking up in his house that he shared with his friends and the roommates, and he heard someone downstairs making noise, which he said was odd because he's always the first one up in the morning, and all his roommates are sleeping in. You could imagine, people in college, they just sleep in and don't get up early, or I guess that might be a stereotype. And so when he went downstairs and investigated around, he found a young man, he said, that he didn't know and didn't recognize. And so in this coma, he actually was able to converse with this unknown man, and then they had a couple back and forths, and then Kevin found out his name was George. And so he and George spent a long day, or I guess, I don't know what a coma would feel like, but just it seemed like timeless. And Kevin he loved to play soccer, and he hated staying indoors. So Kevin is getting restless. He wants to go outside. He wants to leave the house that he's in with George and play soccer and just hang out. But George, what Kevin said was that George would not allow him to leave the house. And so they fought about it as if they were brothers, he said. But George was adamant that he stay inside. And so he encouraged him to be patient. And so Kevin also said he remembers passing the time by doing schoolwork. which he said people would be surprised at because he never did schoolwork before his accident. And then he also played a very, very popular game called FIFA, which I thought was very cool. And so later, after he recovered from his injuries, Kevin mentioned to his roommate, or no, he talked about the story to his mom, and then afterwards, his mom showed him a picture of a man, and he had recognized George as Pier Giorgio, which was amazing because that picture that his mom showed him was sent to his mother by a relative of hers who suggested that she ask Pier Giorgio Frassati for his intercession for Kevin when he was going through his traumatic event. So, what's the significance of this story? A, it showed the power of God because he allowed a man in a coma who was not conscious to be interacting with a blessed, a holy man in heaven like Pier. And so it just shows the power of God and his reach, that no one's too helpless to, save in a way. Also, one that I noted and related to was that they played FIFA, which I am a soccer fan, and I have the video game FIFA on my PlayStation, and I play pretty much every day, and so I love that game. And so it was pretty cool to see, Pier Giorgio, who died in 1925, to be playing a modern game like FIFA, and it just shows that his affinity for sports and that he loves to play soccer. It also seems like a cool activity to do with the Saint. I would love to play FIFA with Pier Giorgio if I could. And so it just speaks to that relatability that I mentioned earlier. And also, lastly, is that I believe that we need to invoke Pier more often, especially in tough situations, because he is a blessed and he's not a canonized saint. Hopefully this miracle would put him over the top, but he's in need of a miracle. So I think it's a good idea for all of us who have, well, I don't have kids, but just like friends, family members, to invoke his name and to ask for his intercession. He'd be a good ally to have in the spiritual life and in just going through everyday life, and works situations and whatnot. So that's all I have for today. Hopefully y'all guys liked this video, and hopefully that y'all just like and subscribe and comment if you have had ever powerful stories with Pier Giorgio. And yeah, have a good day.